The sun was setting over the sprawling city, casting long shadows across the busy airport terminal. People of all ages and backgrounds bustled about, some rushing to catch their flights while others waited patiently at the gates. Among the crowd stood Captain Marcus Johnson, a tall, confident man in his mid-40s with deep brown skin and sharp features. He wore his navy blue pilot's uniform proudly, the golden stripes on his shoulders gleaming under the fluorescent lights. For Marcus, flying wasn't just a job, it was a passion. Over 2 decades of experience had made him one of the most skilled pilots in the industry, but today felt different. Something in the air seemed off. Though he couldn't quite put his finger on it, Marcus adjusted his cap and took a deep breath before heading toward Gate 17, where Flight 403 awaited its passengers. The plane, a sleek Boeing 737, sat on the tarmac like a giant bird ready to take flight. As he walked, Marcus exchanged polite smiles with the ground staff and nodded at a few familiar faces. Inside, however, his mind wandered. He thought about his wife and kids back home, waiting for him to return after this trip. He also thought about the challenges he'd faced as a black man in a predominantly white profession. There were times when passengers questioned his ability simply because of the color of his skin, but Marcus never let those moments define him. Instead, he used them as fuel to prove himself again and again. The boarding process began smoothly enough. Passengers filed onto the plane, stowing their carry-ons in overhead compartments and settling into their seats. A young mother juggled her toddler while trying to secure a window seat. An elderly couple held hands as they shuffled down the aisle, and a group of college students laughed loudly, clearly excited about their vacation. Everything appeared normal, ordinary, even. But Marcus couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that lingered in the pit of his stomach. Maybe it was the way 4 particular men boarded the plane together, exchanging quick, furtive glances as they spread out across different rows. They didn't look like regular travelers. There was something calculated about their movements, almost rehearsed. Once everyone was seated, Marcus entered the cockpit and went through his pre-flight checklist with meticulous care. Beside him sat First Officer Rachel Bennett, a bright-eyed woman in her early 30s who admired Marcus's calm demeanor and professionalism. "Ready for another smooth ride?" she asked with a smile, flipping switches and adjusting dials. Marcus returned the grin but remained quiet, his focus entirely on the task ahead. Outside, the engines roared to life and the plane taxied down the runway. Within minutes, they were airborne, climbing higher and higher until the city below became a patchwork of twinkling lights. As the aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude, Marcus relaxed slightly. The initial tension eased, replaced by the rhythmic hum of the engines and the soft chatter of passengers behind him. Back in the cabin, the flight attendants moved gracefully between rows, offering drinks and snacks. But not everyone was enjoying the journey. The 4 men who had caught Marcus's attention earlier now sat rigidly in their seats, their eyes darting around the cabin. One of them whispered something into his phone, covering his mouth with his hand to avoid being overheard. Another kept glancing toward the cockpit, his expression unreadable but unsettling. Unbeknownst to anyone, these men weren't ordinary passengers. They were members of a racist gang known for their violent acts and hateful ideology. Their target? Captain Marcus Johnson. Word had spread among their circles that Marcus was assigned to this flight, and they saw it as an opportunity to make a statement. To them, Marcus represented everything they despised: success, authority, and leadership, in someone they believed didn't deserve it. Their plan was simple yet terrifying. They would hijack the plane, humiliate Marcus, and use the situation to broadcast their twisted beliefs to the world. While the hijackers plotted silently, other passengers carried on with their routines. Lisa Carter, a 28-year-old graphic designer, sat near the middle of the plane, scrolling through photos on her phone. She was traveling alone to visit her family for the holidays and had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. Across the aisle, an older gentleman named Harold adjusted his glasses, engrossed in a paperback novel. Neither of them paid much attention to the suspicious behavior unfolding nearby. After all, why would they? No one expects danger when they're thousands of feet in the air surrounded by strangers. Back in the cockpit, Marcus noticed a flicker of movement on the security camera feed showing the cabin. It was subtle, a slight shift in posture from one of the men, but it was enough to raise his guard. "Rachel," he said quietly, nodding toward the screen. "Keep an eye on row 12. Something doesn't feel right." Rachel frowned, studying the footage carefully. "You think we should alert the crew?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to cause unnecessary panic, but his instincts told him trouble was brewing. "Let's wait and see," he replied finally, keeping his tone steady. Meanwhile, the hijackers grew bolder. One of them stood up abruptly, claiming he needed to use the restroom. As he passed by the flight attendant's station, he slipped a small device into his pocket, a signal jammer designed to block communication with the outside world. Another member casually opened his bag, revealing a concealed weapon wrapped in cloth. They exchanged nods, signaling that the time had come to act. The moment the seatbelt sign switched off and the cabin lights dimmed slightly, chaos erupted. The first sign of trouble came when one of the hijackers shouted, brandishing a knife and ordering everyone to stay still. Screams filled the air as passengers scrambled to comply, unsure of what was happening. Children began to cry and adults froze in shock. The hijackers quickly established control, herding people toward the back of the plane while one of them stormed toward the cockpit. Panic gripped the cabin, turning the once peaceful atmosphere into sheer pandemonium. In the cockpit, Marcus heard the commotion growing louder. His heart pounded as footsteps approached rapidly. Before he could react, the door burst open and a masked figure stepped inside, pointing a gun directly at him. "Hands where I can see them," the man barked, his voice cold and menacing. Rachel instinctively raised her hands, her eyes wide with fear. Marcus followed suit, his mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen, not here, not now. Yet as the reality of the situation sank in, one thing became clear. Marcus wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting against hatred itself. The hijacker sneered at Marcus, his lips curling into a cruel smirk. "You thought you were special, didn't you?" He spat, his words laced with venom. "A black man flying a plane? Pathetic." Marcus clenched his jaw, refusing to respond. He knew better than to engage. This wasn't about logic or reason. It was about hate. The hijacker grabbed Marcus roughly by the arm, dragging him out of the cockpit and into the chaotic cabin. Passengers gasped as they saw their captain being manhandled, his face stoic despite the circumstances. The hijackers wanted to break him, to strip away his dignity in front of everyone, but Marcus refused to give them the satisfaction. Even in the face of danger, he stood tall, determined not to let fear or prejudice win. And so, the nightmare unfolded. What started as a routine flight had turned into a battleground, a clash between hatred and humanity, fear and courage. Little did anyone know the real fight was only beginning. The hijackers moved with chilling efficiency, their actions calculated and brutal. After dragging Marcus into the cabin, they forced him to stand at the front, his hands still bound behind his back. Passengers cringed as one of the men pressed the barrel of a gun against Marcus's temple, sneering loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is what happens when you think you're better than us," he growled, his voice dripping with venom. The other hijackers spread out through the cabin, brandishing weapons and shouting orders. "Nobody moves, nobody talks," they barked. Commands like soldiers, herding terrified passengers toward the rear of the plane. Lisa Carter, seated near the middle of the aircraft, felt her stomach churn as she watched the scene unfold. Her heart raced, and her palms grew clammy. She glanced around, taking in the frightened faces of her fellow travelers. A mother clutched her child tightly, whispering reassurances that sounded hollow even to herself. An elderly man nearby muttered prayers under his breath, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. Lisa wanted to scream, to cry, to do something, but fear paralyzed her. Yet beneath the surface of her terror, a flicker of defiance began to stir. She couldn't just sit there and let this happen. Harold, the older gentleman sitting across from Lisa, caught her eye. He had set aside his book and was now watching the hijackers with a mixture of anger and determination. "We can't just let them win," he whispered hoarsely, leaning closer so only Lisa could hear. His words startled her, breaking through the haze of panic. For a moment she hesitated, unsure if he was serious. But then she nodded slowly, realizing he was right. If they didn't fight back, who would? Lisa reached for her phone, which she'd tucked into her jacket pocket earlier. It was a risky move. She knew the hijackers might notice, but she couldn't resist the urge to try. With trembling fingers, she opened her messaging app and typed a quick note to her brother James, a police officer stationed in another city. "Hijacked. On Flight 403, racist gang targeting pilot. Need help ASAP." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, praying the message would reach him in time. As soon as the text went through, she turned off her phone and slid it back into her pocket, hoping no one had seen her. Meanwhile, Marcus stood stoically at the front of the cabin, refusing to show weakness despite the gun pressed against his head. The hijacker taunted him relentlessly, spewing racist slurs meant to demean and dehumanize. "You don't belong here," the man snarled. "You're nothing but a glorified bus driver." Marcus clenched his jaw, his mind racing. He knew better than to react. He'd dealt with prejudice before, though never in such a life-threatening situation. Still, every insult cut deep, striking at the core of his identity. Yet amidst the hatred, a quiet resolve took hold. He wouldn't give these men the satisfaction of seeing him break. Suddenly, one of the hijackers approached Marcus, holding a piece of rope. "Tie him up," the leader ordered, gesturing toward a nearby seat. Two of the men grabbed Marcus roughly, forcing him into the seat and securing him tightly. Despite the pain of the ropes digging into his wrists, Marcus remained calm, scanning the cabin for any sign of opportunity. His eyes locked briefly with Lisa's, and though neither said a word, an unspoken understanding passed between them. There was hope yet, however faint. Back in the cockpit, Rachel Bennett worked frantically to keep the plane stable while two hijackers loomed over her, demanding she explain how to operate the controls. "I'm not doing anything until you let Captain Johnson go," she snapped, surprising even herself with her boldness. One of the men slapped her across the face, leaving a red welt on her cheek. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to back down. "You'll crash this plane without him," she warned, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The hijackers exchanged uneasy glances, torn between their desire to assert control and their lack of aviation knowledge. Outside the plane, unbeknownst to anyone aboard, Lisa's desperate text message had reached her brother, Detective James Carter. James read the words with mounting horror, his blood running cold. Without wasting a second, he contacted airport security and provided them with the details of the hijacking. Authorities sprang into action, scrambling fighter jets to locate the aircraft and tracking its position via radar. Negotiators were brought in, preparing to establish communication with the hijackers in hopes of resolving the situation peacefully. Though the passengers inside the plane remained unaware of the efforts underway to save them, help was already on the way. Back in the cabin, tensions continued to escalate. The hijackers grew increasingly agitated, their frustration boiling over as they struggled to maintain control. One of them stormed down the aisle, yanking open overhead compartments and rifling through luggage in search of valuables. Another demanded all electronic devices be handed over, confiscating phones and tablets to prevent anyone from contacting the outside world. Their harsh voices echoed through the confined space, intensifying the atmosphere of dread. Passengers huddled together, their bodies tense with fear, but their spirits began to shift ever so slightly. The seed of resistance planted by Lisa and Harold was starting to grow. Lisa leaned closer to Harold, whispering urgently. "We have to do something," she said, her voice low but firm. "If we wait too long, it'll be too late." Harold nodded, his weathered face etched with determination. "We'll need others to join us," he replied, "but we have to be smart about it." Together, they discreetly signaled to a few nearby passengers. A burly man traveling for business, a young woman clutching a water bottle, and a teenager with a backpack slung over his shoulder. Each person understood the gravity of the situation and agreed to help when the time came. As the hijackers argued amongst themselves, distracted by their own growing paranoia, Lisa and her small group formulated a plan. They decided to strike during a moment of confusion or weakness, using whatever objects they could find as improvised weapons. The burly man volunteered to tackle one of the hijackers, while the young woman offered to throw her water bottle to create a diversion. Harold suggested using his walking cane to disarm another assailant, and Lisa prepared to grab the nearest sharp object, a pen, from her bag. Though the odds were stacked against them, they knew they had no choice but to. Out in the cockpit, Marcus seized a rare opportunity. When one of the hijackers momentarily stepped away to check on the cabin, Marcus lunged forward, using his bound hands to knock the remaining man off balance. The sudden movement startled the hijacker, giving Marcus just enough time to wrestle the weapon away. With adrenaline surging through his veins, he managed to subdue the man, tying him up with the same rope that had been used on him earlier. Breathing heavily, Marcus turned his attention to the controls, determined to regain command of the aircraft. By now, the hijackers in the cabin had realized something was wrong. One of them shouted angrily, rushing toward the cockpit. But Lisa and her group sprang into action. The burly man tackled him to the ground, pinning him down with sheer force. The young woman hurled her water bottle at another hijacker, temporarily blinding him as liquid splashed into his eyes. Harold swung his cane with surprising agility, striking a third assailant squarely in the knee and sending him stumbling backward. Passengers who had initially frozen in fear now joined the fray, grabbing jackets, shoes, and anything else they could use to restrain the attackers. Chaos erupted in the cabin as the tide began to turn. The hijackers, caught off guard by the unexpected rebellion, scrambled to regain control, but their numbers dwindled quickly. Lisa fought with everything she had, using the pen to jab at one of the men's hands until he dropped his weapon. Others followed suit, working together to overpower the remaining hijackers. Within minutes, the once terrifying figures lay tied up and defeated, their hateful rhetoric silenced by the collective bravery of ordinary people. Breathless and shaken but victorious, the passengers cheered as the reality of their triumph sank, and Lisa collapsed into her seat, tears streaming down her face, not from fear but from relief and pride. Harold patted her shoulder gently, offering a weary smile. "We did it," he said simply, his voice tinged with awe. Outside the plane, the distant roar of fighter jets reminded them that help was close, but they had already won the hardest battle. Marcus, having regained control of the cockpit, communicated with air traffic control to guide the plane toward the nearest airport. His voice remained steady, betraying none of the turmoil he'd endured. As the wheels touched down safely on the runway, emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft, their flashing lights painting the night sky in hues of red and blue. Cheers erupted inside the cabin as passengers embraced one another, their shared ordeal forging bonds stronger than any hijacker's hate could sever. Though the scars of that day would linger, so too would the memory of courage and unity, a icy-aware testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And as Marcus stepped out of the cockpit to thunderous applause, he knew that together they had faced the unimaginable and emerged victorious. The plane touched down on the runway with a gentle thud, its wheels screeching slightly as they made contact with the tarmac. Inside the cabin, the passengers erupted into cheers and applause, their relief palpable. For many, it felt like waking up from a nightmare, only this nightmare had been all too real. Lisa sat in her seat, her body trembling with exhaustion but her heart swelling with pride. She glanced around at the faces of her fellow passengers, each one etched with a mix of emotions: fear, gratitude, disbelief, and triumph. The hijackers, now tied up and subdued, slumped in their seats, their earlier bravado replaced by defeated silence. Marcus emerged from the cockpit moments later, his face weary but resolute. As he walked down the aisle, passengers clapped and cheered louder, thanking him not just for landing the plane safely, but for standing firm against hatred. Outside, emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft, their flashing lights illuminating the night sky. Fighter jets hovered overhead, a stark reminder of how close the situation had come to spiraling out of control. Authorities boarded the plane swiftly, taking charge of the hijackers and ensuring everyone's safety. Detectives and officers moved through the cabin, speaking softly to passengers and gathering statements. Among them was Detective James Carter, Lisa's brother, who had raced to the scene after receiving her desperate text message. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Lisa, sitting pale but composed in her seat. Relief washed over his face as he rushed to her side. "Are you okay?" James asked, his voice thick with emotion. Lisa nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her shaking hands told a different story. James hugged her tightly, his protective instincts kicking in. He then turned to Marcus, extending a hand in gratitude. "Captain Johnson, I can't thank you enough for what you did today," he said earnestly. Marcus shook his hand firmly, his expression calm but tinged with sadness. "It wasn't just me," he replied. "Everyone here played a part. We stood together." As the authorities escorted the hijackers off the plane, their hateful rhetoric silenced for good, the passengers began disembarking. Each step onto solid ground felt surreal, as if they were stepping back into reality after a harrowing journey through darkness. Medical teams waited on the tarmac, ready to provide care to anyone in need. Some passengers required immediate attention, cuts, bruises, or simply the overwhelming shock of what they'd endured. But others refused treatment, insisting they were fine. What they needed more than anything was time to process what had happened. Detective Carter took charge of coordinating the investigation, working closely with federal agents to piece together the events of the hijacking. The racist gang, it turned out, had meticulously planned the attack, targeting Marcus specifically because of his race. Their goal wasn't just to hijack the plane, it was to send a message, a vile, hateful message that sought to strip Marcus of his dignity and authority. But their plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of breaking him, they had ignited a spark of resistance among the passengers, turning an act of hate into a powerful display of unity and courage. In the days that followed, news of the incident spread rapidly, capturing national and international attention. Headlines blared stories of the heroic pilot and the brave passengers who had fought back against their captors. Social media buzzed with admiration for Marcus, Lisa, Harold, and the countless others who had risen to the occasion. Videos of the passengers cheering as the plane landed went viral, accompanied by hashtags like "Unity in Adversity" and "Your Courage in Flight." Marcus became a symbol of resilience, hailed not only for his skill as a pilot, but for his unwavering strength in the face of racism and violence. Interview requests poured in from journalists eager to hear his story firsthand. But Marcus remained humble, deflecting praise onto the passengers who had risked their lives alongside him. Lisa and Harold also found themselves thrust into the spotlight. Reporters praised Lisa's quick thinking in sending the text message that alerted authorities, crediting her actions with saving lives. Harold, whose walking cane had become an unlikely weapon of defense, was celebrated as a hero despite his age. When asked about their bravery, both insisted they were simply doing what anyone would have done in their position. "We didn't think about being heroes," Lisa told one interviewer. "We just knew we couldn't let them win." Her words resonated deeply, striking a chord with people around the world who saw in her story a reflection of their own potential for courage. For Marcus, however, the aftermath of the hijacking carried a heavier weight. While he appreciated the recognition and support, he couldn't ignore the underlying truth that had fueled the attack. Racism still existed, lurking beneath the surface of society and manifesting in horrifying ways. In interviews, he spoke candidly about the discrimination he had faced throughout his career, from passengers questioning his qualifications to colleagues dismissing his achievements. "This wasn't the first time someone tried to make me feel small because of the color of my skin," he admitted during a televised interview. "But it won't stop me from doing what I love, and it shouldn't stop anyone else either." The incident sparked important conversations about prejudice and hate crimes, prompting calls for greater awareness and action. Schools incorporated discussions about the hijacking into their curriculums, using it as a case study in combating racism and fostering empathy. Community organizations hosted events to honor the bravery of those involved, inviting Marcus, Lisa, and Harold to share their experiences. At one such event, a young boy approached Marcus shyly, clutching a toy airplane. "I want to be a pilot, like you when I grow up," he said, his voice filled with admiration. Marcus knelt down to meet the boy's gaze, smiling warmly. "You can do anything you set your mind to," he replied. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Back home, Marcus reunited with his family, hugging his wife and children tightly as if afraid they might disappear. They had followed the news anxiously, praying for his safe return, and now they clung to him, grateful beyond words. Over dinner that night, Marcus recounted the events of the hijacking, emphasizing not his own role but the collective effort of everyone aboard the plane. "It wasn't just me who saved us," he told his kids. "It was teamwork, it was courage. It was people standing up for what's right, even when it was scary." Lisa returned to her quiet life, though nothing felt quite the same. She found herself replaying the events of that day over and over in her mind, marveling at how quickly ordinary people could transform into heroes. Her newfound fame brought invitations to speak at conferences and community gatherings, where she encouraged others to stand up against injustice. "If we don't fight back, who will?" she often asked, echoing the question Harold had posed to her on the plane. Her words inspired countless individuals to reflect on their own capacity for bravery. Harold, too, resumed his daily routine, though he carried himself with a renewed sense of purpose. Neighbors greeted him with smiles and nods of respect, acknowledging the role he had played in thwarting the hijackers. At the local library where he volunteered, children flocked to him, eager to hear his story. With a twinkle in his eye, Harold recounted how a simple walking cane had helped bring down a gang of armed men. "Sometimes," he mused, "the smallest things can make the biggest difference." Months passed and life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as possible after such a traumatic event. Passengers from Flight 403 formed a tight-knit community, staying in touch through social media groups and occasional reunions. They shared updates on their lives, celebrated milestones together, and supported one another through the lingering effects of trauma. For many, the bond forged during those terrifying hours on the plane proved unbreakable. As for Marcus, he continued flying, undeterred by the dangers he had faced. Every time he stepped into the cockpit, he reminded himself of the lesson he had learned that day. No amount of hatred could extinguish the light of courage and unity. And so, high above the clouds, he soared once again, not just as a pilot, but as a beacon of hope for anyone who dared to dream despite adversity. The months following the hijacking of Flight 403 brought profound changes, not just for Captain Marcus Johnson and the passengers who had survived the ordeal, but for society at large. The incident became more than just a news story. It evolved into a symbol of resistance against hatred and prejudice. People from all walks of life were inspired by the courage displayed on that fateful flight, and the ripple effects of their actions began to shape conversations about racism, unity, and human resilience. Marcus returned to work after taking a brief leave to recover emotionally and physically. Stepping back into the cockpit felt surreal at first. Every click of the controls and hum of the engines reminded him of the chaos he had endured. But with each flight, Marcus grew stronger, drawing strength from the knowledge that he had faced evil head-on and prevailed. His colleagues noticed a subtle shift in him. While he remained as professional and composed as ever, there was an added layer of quiet determination in his demeanor. He carried himself not just as a pilot, but as someone who had stared down hatred and refused to let it define him. One day, as Marcus prepared for another routine flight, a young flight attendant approached him hesitantly. "Captain Johnson," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" Marcus smiled warmly, putting her at ease. "Of course," he replied. The woman took a deep breath before continuing. "I heard about what happened on Flight 403. It made me realize how much bravery it takes to stand up for yourself and others. I wanted to thank you for showing us that no matter how hard things get, we can still fight back." Her words caught Marcus off guard, but they also filled him with pride. He nodded thoughtfully and responded, Thank you for reminding me why this job matters so much. We're all here to make sure people reach their destinations safely, and sometimes that means protecting them in ways we never imagined. Word of Marcus's heroism reached far beyond the aviation industry. He received invitations to speak at schools, universities, and community events across the country. At these gatherings, he shared his story candidly, emphasizing the importance of standing together in the face of adversity. During one such speech at a high school auditorium packed with students, Marcus recounted the moment when Lisa and Harold led the rebellion against the hijackers. "It wasn't just me who saved that plane," he told the audience. "It was ordinary people, people like you, who decided they weren't going to let fear control them. They chose to act, even when it was scary. And because of that, we all made it home alive." His message resonated deeply with young listeners, particularly those who had grown up hearing stories of discrimination or feeling powerless in the face of injustice. After the speech, a teenage boy approached Marcus, clutching a notebook nervously. "I want to be brave like you someday," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "You already are," he said firmly. "Bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when you're scared. Remember that." Meanwhile, Lisa Carter found herself navigating a new chapter of her life. The media attention had subsided somewhat, but the impact of her actions lingered. Strangers stopped her on the street to express gratitude, calling her a real-life hero. At first, Lisa struggled to reconcile this image with her own perception of herself. She didn't see herself as extraordinary, just someone who had done what needed to be done. Over time, however, she came to embrace the role she had been thrust into, using it as an opportunity to advocate for change. Lisa began volunteering with organizations dedicated to combating racism and promoting inclusivity. She spoke passionately about the dangers of hate groups and urged communities to address the root causes of prejudice. One evening, during a panel discussion hosted by a local nonprofit, Lisa recounted the gut-wrenching moment when she sent the text message to her brother. "I didn't think twice about it," she explained. "All I knew was that if I did nothing, the hijackers might succeed. So I acted, not because I'm special, but because I couldn't live with myself if I hadn't tried." Her honesty moved many in the audience to tears, including a young mother who later approached Lisa to thank her for giving hope to future generations. Harold, too, continued to inspire those around him. Though he modestly downplayed his role in the rebellion, his actions spoke volumes. Neighbors often remarked on how his demeanor had changed since the hijacking. He seemed more engaged, more willing to lend a helping hand. Whether it was mentoring kids at the library or organizing neighborhood cleanup drives, Harold embodied the spirit of kindness and solidarity. During one such event, a curious child asked him, "Were you really brave enough to fight bad guys with your cane?" Harold chuckled, leaning on the very same cane as he answered, "Well, son, I wasn't thinking about being brave. I was thinking about protecting my friends, and sometimes that's all it takes to be a hero." The bond between the passengers of Flight 403 only grew stronger over time. What had started as a random group of travelers thrown together by circumstance had transformed into a tight-knit family united by shared trauma and triumph. They formed a private online group where members could share updates, offer support, and celebrate milestones. Birthdays, promotions, and weddings became occasions for collective joy, while struggles with PTSD or personal challenges prompted offers of help and encouragement. The group even organized annual reunions, gathering at different locations to reconnect and reflect on how far they'd come. At one reunion, held at a cozy lodge near the mountains, the atmosphere buzzed with laughter and warmth. Children ran around playing tag, oblivious to the weight of history their parents carried. Adults swapped stories over steaming cups of coffee, reminiscing about the hijacking with a mix of humor and reverence. "Remember when Harold swung that cane like a baseball bat?" someone joked, eloquating roars of laughter. Harold grinned sheepishly, raising his cup in a mock toast. "And don't forget Lisa throwing that water bottle like a pro pitcher," he quipped, earning another round of applause. But amid the lightheartedness, there were moments of solemn reflection. A candlelit vigil was held on the second night of the reunion, honoring the resilience of everyone aboard Flight 403 and acknowledging the scars that still lingered. Marcus stood at the center of the gathering, speaking softly but powerfully. "We've come a long way since that day," he said, his voice steady. "But let's not forget why we're here. We survived because we chose to stand together. That's a lesson worth carrying forward, not just for ourselves, but for anyone fighting their own battles." As the vigil concluded, participants released paper lanterns into the night sky, each one inscribed with messages of hope and gratitude. Watching the glowing lights drift upward, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that the legacy of Flight 403 extended far beyond the individuals involved. It was a testament to the enduring power of unity and courage. No matter how dark the skies might seem, humanity always found a way to rise above. For Marcus, Lisa, Harold, and the rest of the passengers, life moved forward, shaped indelibly by the harrowing experience they had shared. Yet they carried its lessons with them, weaving them into the fabric of their daily lives. Through acts of kindness, advocacy, and simple human connection, they ensured that the memory of Flight 403 would continue to inspire others for generations to come. The legacy of Flight 403 continued to grow, transcending borders and touching lives in ways no one could have anticipated. What had started as a terrifying hijacking became a beacon of hope, a story that reminded people of their capacity for courage, unity, and resilience. The passengers who had once been strangers now stood united not only by shared trauma, but also by the profound realization that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they came together. Marcus Johnson returned to his role as a pilot with renewed purpose. Each time he stepped into the cockpit, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for his family, his colleagues, and the passengers who had fought alongside him on that fateful day. He carried their stories with him, letting them guide him through moments of doubt or fear. His presence in the aviation industry became more than just professional. It was a symbol of perseverance. Colleagues often sought his advice, not just about flying techniques, but about how to navigate challenges both in the air and on the ground. Marcus always responded with humility, reminding them that true strength lay in standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. One particular flight months after the hijacking showcased this philosophy vividly. As Marcus prepared for takeoff, he noticed a young passenger seated near the window, nervously clutching her seatbelt. Her wide eyes darted around the cabin, betraying her anxiety. Sensing her discomfort, Marcus decided to make an announcement before departure. "Good morning, everyone," he said over the intercom. "This is your captain speaking. I know some of you might feel uneasy about flying, especially after hearing stories like mine, but let me tell you something. Every single person on this plane has the power to overcome fear. Together we'll ensure a safe journey, not just physically, but emotionally too." The cabin fell silent for a moment before erupting into applause. The young girl smiled faintly, visibly reassured by Marcus's words. It was a small gesture, but it underscored the lasting impact of his leadership. Lisa Carter, meanwhile, found herself at the forefront of advocacy efforts against racism and hate crimes. Her experience aboard Flight 403 had ignited a fire within her, a determination to turn personal adversity into societal change. She collaborated with nonprofits, schools, and community organizations to create programs aimed at fostering empathy and understanding. One initiative she spearheaded involved workshops where participants shared their own experiences with discrimination and brainstormed solutions to combat prejudice. These sessions brought together diverse groups of people: students, teachers, business professionals, and retirees, all united by a desire to build a better future. During one such workshop, Lisa recounted the harrowing moment when she sent the text message to her brother. "I didn't think of myself as brave back then," she admitted. "I was terrified, but I realized that doing nothing would mean letting hatred win, and I couldn't live with that." Her honesty resonated deeply with attendees, many of whom confessed they had faced similar fears in their own lives. A teenage boy raised his hand hesitantly and asked, What if I'm not strong enough to stand up? Lisa smiled warmly. None of us are strong enough alone, she replied. But when we stand together, our voices become unstoppable. Harold, the elderly gentleman whose walking cane had played a pivotal role in subduing the hijackers, embraced his newfound status as an accidental hero with characteristic modesty. Though he rarely sought attention, his actions spoke louder than any words ever could. He volunteered tirelessly at local shelters, libraries, and senior centers, inspiring others with his unwavering optimism. During one storytelling session for children, Harold described the hijacking in simple terms, focusing on themes of teamwork and bravery. Sometimes, he told the rapt audience, the smallest acts can lead to the biggest changes. Whether it's helping someone cross the street or standing up for what's right, every little bit counts. The bond between the passengers of Flight 403 remained unbreakable. Their annual reunions became cherished traditions, drawing media attention and inspiring countless others. At one reunion held in a picturesque park, families gathered under colorful tents, sharing laughter and memories. Children played tag while adults exchanged updates about their lives. Amidst the festivities, a memorial plaque was unveiled, a tribute to the resilience of everyone aboard the flight. Engraved on it were the words, "In the face of hatred, we chose unity. In the shadow of fear, we found courage." As Marcus unveiled the plaque, his voice cracked with emotion. "We didn't ask for this challenge," he began, addressing the crowd, "but we faced it head-on, proving that love and solidarity are stronger than hate. Let this plaque remind us, and everyone who hears our story, that even in the darkest moments there is light, and that light comes from each other." The audience erupted into applause, tears streaming down many faces. For those present, it was a powerful affirmation of the strength they had discovered within themselves. Beyond the immediate circle of passengers, the story of Flight 403 inspired broader cultural shifts. Schools incorporated lessons about the hijacking into their curricula, using it as a case study in overcoming adversity and promoting inclusivity. Teachers encouraged students to reflect on how they could contribute to creating a kinder, more compassionate world. Art projects, essays, and debates sprang up around the theme of unity, with young minds engaging deeply with the idea that collective action could drive meaningful change. In the corporate world, companies began organizing diversity training sessions, inspired by the events of Flight 403. Employees participated in team-building exercises designed to foster collaboration and mutual respect. One CEO, moved by Marcus's speech at a leadership conference, implemented a new policy requiring managers to address incidents of workplace discrimination promptly and transparently. If a group of strangers trapped on a plane could unite against hatred, he explained during an internal meeting, surely we can do the same in our offices. Even Hollywood took notice. A major film studio announced plans to adapt the story of Flight 403 into a feature-length movie, highlighting the bravery of Marcus, Lisa, Harold, and the other passengers. While some worried the portrayal might sensationalize the event, filmmakers worked closely with the survivors to ensure authenticity. "This isn't just entertainment," the director emphasized during a press conference. "It's a reminder of what humanity is capable of when we choose to stand together." For Marcus, Lisa, Harold, and the rest of the passengers, life moved forward. But the lessons of that day stayed with them forever. They understood that their actions had sparked something greater than themselves, a movement toward kindness, empathy, and courage. Whenever they encountered challenges, whether personal struggles or societal injustices, they drew strength from the knowledge that they had already triumphed over unimaginable odds. Years later, as Marcus sat in his garden, watching the sunset, he reflected on the journey that had unfolded since the hijacking. Beside him lay a scrapbook filled with letters, photos, and mementos from fellow passengers, journalists, and admirers. Each item represented a thread in the tapestry of resilience they had woven together. He smiled softly, thinking of Lisa's determination, Harold's wisdom, and the countless others who had risen to the occasion. Flight 403 had taught them all an invaluable lesson, that in the face of hatred, unity prevails. In the grip of fear, courage shines brightest. And though the scars of that day would never fully fade, neither would the indomitable spirit of those who refused to let darkness define them. As Marcus closed the scrapbook, he whispered to himself, "We did it. Together."